Okay, so here we have a draw lock cutter from Tornado, and I want to show you how to set this up on the router table. We need to set two distances. One is the vertical height of the router cutter from the table, and the other distance is the distance of the fence from the router cutter. So let's look at one at a time. Firstly, the vertical height from the router table. Well, that's an addition of this distance here. Here's the cutter tip, so from that distance there to there, and also added on to this distance from that point to that corner. Okay, so we've got two distances, that one and that one, which we add together. So there we are, I've drawn that out as a diagram. I hope that makes it a bit clearer. So we've got two vertical distances. On my cutter, the small distance A was 4mm and the slightly larger distance B was 5mm. I measured those with vernier calipers. So added together, that's 9mm above the router table. So we've set the height, we've worked out the height of the router cutter from the table. Now that distance doesn't change. That's the same for all joints that we make with this cutter. The second thing we have to work out is the distance of the fence from this cutter tip. And that does change with the thickness of the stock that we're going to use. And the final measurement from the fence to this tip is half the thickness of the stock plus a small distance which is measured radially from here, this face, to this centre point. That centre point of that undercut. Now that small distance is best measured by measuring the two diameters of the two cutter faces. This diameter here, the diameter there, and that diameter there. And if we add those two diameters together and divide by 4, we get this small distance here from the centre line from the centre of that undercut to there. So the two diameters of the cutter added together divided by 4 gives that very small distance, which I've called X here, and we add that to half the thickness of the stock to give us the distance from the fence. On the stock I'm using, this is 16mm thick beech, and so I've added half the thickness of that onto that small dimension X. Now on my cutter, the first diameter was 50.8mm, the second diameter was 41.2mm. Added together and divided by 4, that gives me 2.4mm. I've added that to half the thickness of my stock, and the total is 10.4mm from the fence. So here we are at the router table. I've fitted the draw lock cutter here into the router. Now I'm going to use one of these digital height gauges. Very useful for setting things up like this. Make sure the tip is that screwed up, and zero it on the table, and then we can use it across the cutter onto the tip of the cutter like that. Just get it up a little bit. Okay, 9mm above the table. Okay, and I'm going to use the same digital height gauge to measure the distance from the cutter tip to the fence, which in my case I've worked out to be 10.4mm. You'll see I'm using here a piece of MDF on the fence to give me 10.4 to give me as little clearance as possible around the cutter to support the work. So once we've got the dust extraction fitted and we're wearing the appropriate safety goggles and ear defenders, we're going to use one piece of stock to cut the end across the end like this, and I'm using a piece of stock behind it just to prevent or minimise breakout in the tail edge of that. So we've cut the front face of the draw piece, and we're now going to cut the side of the draw piece, which is here, and to do that we stand that on edge and run it past the router cutter. So that's the side piece cut. Here's the front piece. Let's hope they fit together. There we are. Very nice joint.